Welcome to your daily dose. I'm feeling particularly weird today. We're gonna embrace it. I've had a very self-productive few days. I repotted all of my plants, which is wonderful. They're doing great. We're gonna show you a plant. I gave them a lot of water because they were repotted. And this one in particular was only in a cup of water for the previous 3 months. So heavily moisturized. The soil will not be watering that one for a minute again. That's also why we use clay pots, so they absorb the excess moisture and we don't rot the roots. And we have the other baby. Yes, I am a weird plant person. I don't care. Plants are cool. And this lovely. I like this one a lot. This one I found on a porch. I did not steal it from somebody else's porch. I did not steal that plant from somebody else's porch. It was on a porch of an apartment I'd moved into. It was like half dead and in one of those little plastic pots. And I was like, I think I can save this one. And I did. And it's really cool looking. I don't know what it is. That's okay. So anyways, here we are in another day. Let's jump right on into it. I've got nothing in particular of great importance. We're just chilling. Oh yeah, that was my big accomplishment. No, I repotted I did like spring cleaning because it hit in the 50s Fahrenheit here, so it felt great. We had like a 60-degree day and I was like, I'm doing everything. So I repotted the plants. I cleaned the entire apartment. Vacuuming stairs takes forever. Fun adult fact. It's stupid. Anyways, we're gonna move on with our lovely stuff. City Lights Pocket Poets Anthology, edited by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, 60th Anniversary Edition. We were here and we're gonna flip to a random page. Okay. Diane D. Prima, Revolutionary Letter Number 1. I have just realized that the stakes are myself. I have no other. Ransom money, nothing to break or barter but my life. My spirit measured out, in bits spread over. The roulette table, I recoup what I can. Nothing else to shove under the nose of the maitre jeu. Nothing to thrust out the window, no white flag. This flesh all I have to offer. To make the play with, this immediate head, what it comes up with, my move, as we slither over this go-board, stepping always, we hope, between the lines. Jack Kerouac, hymn. And when you showed me Brooklyn Bridge in the morning, ah God, and the people slipping on ice in the street, twice, 2 different people came over, going to work, so earnest and trifle, clutching their pitiful morning daily news, slip on the ice and fall. both inside 5 minutes. And I cried. That's when you taught me tears. Ah, God in the morning, ah, thee. And me leaning on the lamppost, wiping eyes. Nobody's know I'd cried, or would have cared anyway. But oh, I saw my father, and my grandfather's mother, and the long lines of chairs, and tear-sitters and dead. Ah me, I knew God you had better plans than that. So whatever plan you have for me, splitter of majesty, make it short, brief, make it snappy. Bring me home to the eternal mother today, at your service anyway, and until 1959. Another one, Jack Kerouac, poem. I demand that the human race cease multiplying its kind and bow out. I advise it, and as punishment and reward for making this plea, I know I'll be reborn, the last human. Everybody else dead, and I'm an old woman roaming the earth, groaning in caves, sleeping on mats. And sometimes I'll cackle, sometimes pray, sometimes cry, eat and cook, at my little stove in the corner. Always knew it anyway, I'll say, and one morning won't get up from my mat. 1962. Jack Kerouac, How to Meditate. Lights out. Fall, hands aclasped, into instantaneous ecstasy, like a shot of heroin or morphine. The gland inside of my brain discharging. The good glad fluid, holy fluid, as I hap down and hold all my body parts down to a dead stop trance, healing all my sicknesses, erasing all, not even the shred of a I hope you, or a loony balloon left in it, but the mind, blank, serene, thoughtless. When a thought comes springing from afar with its head held forth figure of image, you spoof it out, you spuff it out, you fake it, and it fades. And thought never comes. And with joy you realize for the first time, thinking's just like not thinking. So I don't have to think any more. 1967. I think we're just going to do a duplicate as we did in the last video. Same 4 books. I kind of like the flow of fun, interesting, like This Is Your Mind on Plants, followed by something a little bit more hefty, like Slavoj. And then finishing off, of course, with Hitchhiker, which we adore. We did not finish the introduction to This Is Your Mind on Plants. All right, I think I'm going to read the last sentence of the one paragraph I think where we finished at, and then continue on. So, I use the word blessed in full awareness of the human tragedies that can accompany the use of drugs. Much better than we do, the Greeks understood the two-faced nature of drugs, an understanding reflected in the ambiguity of their term for them, pharmakon. A pharmakon can be either a medicine or a poison. It all depends on use, dose, intention, and set and setting. Set and setting is the term Timothy Leary introduced to underscore the powerful influence of one's mindset and physical setting in shaping a psychedelic experience. Who you trip with and where you trip is who you trip with is huge. It is one of the most important factors in how your psychedelic experience will go, for sure. Set and setting. Location, how you feel there, who you're with, how you feel about them, all that stuff. The word has a third meaning as well, one often relied on during the drug war. A pharmacon is also a scapegoat, something for a group to blame its problems on. Drug abuse is certainly real, but it is less a matter of breaking the law than of falling into an unhealthy relationship with a substance, whether licit or illicit, one in which the ally or medicine has become an enemy. The same opiates that killed some 50,000 Americans by overdose in 2019 also make surgery endurable and ease the passage out of this life. Surely that counts as a blessing. Surely that qualifies as a blessing. The stories I tell here put this trio of psychoactive plant chemicals into the context of our larger relationship to nature. One of the innumerable threads connecting us to the natural world is the one that links plant chemistries to human consciousness. And since this is a relationship, we need to account for the plant's points of view as well as our own. How amazing is it that so many kinds of plants have hit upon the precise recipes for molecules that fit snugly into receptors in human brains, and that by doing so, these molecules can short-circuit our experience of pain, or arouse us, or obliterate the sense of being a separate self. You have to wonder, what's in it for the plants to devise and manufacture molecules that can pass for human neurotransmitters and affect us in such profound ways? Most of the molecules that plants produce that change animal minds start out as tools for defense. Alkaloids like morphine, caffeine, and mescaline are bitter-tasting toxins meant to discourage animals from eating the plants that make them and, should the animals persist, to poison them. But plants are clever, and over the course of evolution they've learned that simply killing a pest outright is not necessarily the smartest strategy. Since a lethal pesticide would quickly select for resistant members of the pest population, rendering it ineffective, Since a lethal pesticide would quickly select for resistant members of the pest population, rendering it ineffective, plants have evolved subtler and more devious strategies, chemicals that instead mess with the minds of animals, confusing or disorienting them or ruining their appetite, something that caffeine, mescaline, and morphine all reliably do. But while most of the psychoactive molecules plants have developed started out as poisons, they sometimes evolved into the opposite, attractants. Scientists recently discovered a handful of species that produce caffeine in their nectar, which is the last place you would expect a plant to serve up a poisonous beverage. These plants have discovered that they can attract pollinators by offering them a small shot of caffeine. Even better, that caffeine has been shown to sharpen the memories of bees, making them more faithful, efficient, and hardworking pollinators. Pretty much what caffeine does for us. Once humans discovered what caffeine and morphine and mescaline could do for them, the plants that produced the greatest amounts of these chemicals were the ones that prospered in the sunshine of our attention. We disseminated their genes around the world, vastly expanding their habitat and providing for their every need. By now our fates and the fates of these plants are complexly intertwined. What began as war has evolved into marriage. Why do we humans go to such lengths to change our minds? And then why do we fence that universal desire with laws and customs, taboos, and anxieties? I'm out of breath just sitting down. This is terrible. It's winter. I need to start exercising again. I go for walks, but it's not the same. These questions have occupied me since I began writing about our engagement with the natural world more than 30 years ago. When you compare this design to the other needs we turn to nature to gratify, for food, clothing, shelter, beauty, and so on, the drive to alter consciousness wouldn't seem to contribute nearly as much, if anything, to our success or survival. In fact, the desire to change consciousness may be seen as maladaptive, since altered states can put us at risk for accidents or make us more vulnerable to attack. Also, many of these plant chemicals are toxic. Others, like morphine, are highly addictive. But if our species' desire to change consciousness is universal, a human given, then doing so should offer benefits to make up for the risks, or natural selection would long ago have weeded out the drug takers. Take, for example, morphine's value as a painkiller, which has made it one of the most important drugs in the pharmacopoeia going back thousands of years. Plants that change consciousness answer to other human needs as well. We shouldn't underestimate the value, to people trapped in monotonous lives, of a substance that can relieve boredom and entertain by sponsoring novel sensations and thoughts in the mind. Some drugs can expand the contours of a world constrained by circumstance, as I discovered during the pandemic. Drugs that enhance sociability not only gratify us, but presumably result in more offspring. Stimulants like caffeine improve concentration, making us better able to learn and work, and to think in rational, linear ways. Human consciousness is always at risk of getting stuck, sending the mind around and around in loops of rumination. Mushroom chemicals like psilocybin can nudge us out of those grooves, loosening stuck brains and making possible fresh patterns of thought. Psychedelic drugs can also benefit us, and occasionally our culture, by stimulating the imagination and nourishing creativity in the individuals who take them. This is not to suggest that all the ideas that occur to the altered mind are any good. Most of them aren't. I don't like that presumed majority. I like the disclaimer of this is not to suggest that all ideas that occur to the altered mind are any good. Some of them aren't, not most. But every now and then a tripping brain will hit upon a novel idea, a solution to a problem, or a new way of looking at things that will benefit the group and possibly change the course of history. The case can be made that the introduction of caffeine to Europe in the 17th century fostered a new, more rational, and sober way of thinking that helped give rise to the Age of Reason and the Enlightenment, because previously they were all just drunk all the time. And we wonder how human history became in this way. And we still make the same choice. We just repeat because people don't. Yep, we don't know history, so we repeat it. We just keep getting drunk over and over and over and over and over and over. But if you keep doing downers, we stay in oppression because nobody gets out, because there's no motivation. It's useful to think of these psychoactive molecules as mutagens, but mutagens operating in the realm of human culture rather than in biology. In the same way that exposure to a disruptive force like radiation can mutate genes, introducing variation and throwing off new traits that every so often prove adaptive for the species, psychoactive drugs operating on the minds of individuals occasionally contribute useful new memes to the evolution of culture, conceptual breakthroughs, fresh metaphors, novel theories. Not always, not even often, but every now and then, the encounter of a mind and a plant molecule changes things. If the human imagination has a natural history, as it must, can there be any doubt that plant chemistries have helped to inform it? Psychedelic compounds can promote experiences of awe and mystical connection that nurture the spiritual impulse of human beings. Indeed, that might have given rise to it in the first place, according to some religious scholars. There's an asterisk. The idea that psychedelics have played a foundational role in religion has been floating around the fringes of religious studies since at least the 1970s, probably before then. When R. Gordon Wasson, the man who rediscovered psilocybin, collaborated with Albert Hofmann, the inventor of lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, and a young classicist named Carl A.P. Ruck to write The Road to Ulysses, Unveiling the Secret of the Mysteries, New York, Harcourt, Brace, Jovanovich, 1978 reprint. Oh, I'm not reading all of that, fucking hell. See all... Oh no, that's all of the fucking... Alright, that was the end. So he's just saying that there's a book that wrote in the 1970s that religion... Okay. The notion of a beyond, of a hidden dimension of reality, or of an afterlife. These too may be memes introduced to a human culture by visions that psychoactive molecules inspired in human minds. Drugs are not the only way to occasion the sort of mystical experience at the core of many religious traditions. Meditation, fasting, and solitude can achieve similar results, but they are a proven tool for making it happen. The spiritual or ceremonial use of plant drugs can also help knit people together. I'm really kind of irritated by that 1970s because, like, this stuff is interesting, I agree. But it's just another white man. And the fact that you're writing that the idea that psychedelics have played a foundational role in religion has been floating around the fringes of religious studies since at least the 1970s is so white supremacist. You are completely ignoring indigenous cultures. Polynesian cultures. And those are just the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Who used drugs, psychoactive drugs, in religious practices. The only people who don't are the Abrahamics, the white people. They're on the sobriety shit. They're like, we must have nothing affect the body. And it's like, kind of like you said in the beginning, it's really hard to define a drug. You intake it and it changes your consciousness. Well, food does that too. Eat an apple and that changes your consciousness. Sugars change. So, the fact that you are implying and directly saying, those are two different words, that you are directly saying that at least the 1970s, like, bro, the 70s? Everything before. Seriously? That's how you want to say it. That's such a weird caveat. That is such a white supremacist caveat for no reason. Microaggression, micro white supremacy, I don't know. I'm gonna keep going. The spiritual or ceremonial use of plant drugs can also help knit people. Yeah. The spiritual or ceremonial use of plant drugs. Like, you're saying the words and completely leaving out the very real history of the research you were talking about. Humanity has used it. Like, if they were doing it, it was part of their conceptual. Because, like, the idea that psychedelic, you're talking about how the idea that these are connected wasn't. Bro, if they were doing it, the idea is already introduced. They were using ceremonial drugs. The idea that ceremonial drugs are tied to religion was introduced. They were introducing it. They were doing it. It's not a new idea. You have the right information and you're just completely leaving out very key parts. Critiquing others' writing does not mean I think it's bad writing. I think this is extremely important and good information, otherwise I wouldn't be reading it. If I did not think this had value, I would not read it. I think this has value. I think most things that you can read have value. Learning how other people think is important and has value. This is also information that I don't know, so it's a way of doing research. But I'm going to absolutely critically think about it. Critically thinking is not a negative thing. It does not mean I am distrustful or anything. It simply means that I'm going to intake information. I'm going to fact check it inside myself with the other information that I've intook and fact checked and make sure it all lines up. And if there are parts that don't, I'm going to talk about them because they're interesting, because it's important. Me saying that little side note in there, that does not make Michael Pollan a bad man at all. We're simply recognizing and acknowledging the caveats and the boundaries, the lines, the perspective of which our writer is coming from. He is a white man in America. And, like, sure, he got arrested for opiates, but he wrote a book. He got rich off of it. How many black and brown people? How many people of color? There are no good ways to say it. How many non-white people, because that seems to be the fucking standard. White is a concept, not a thing. Not a biological thing. Nobody else got rich off that shit legally. Yeah, it was hard and challenging, and I'm sorry, and welcome to America. They lock up people for drugs all the time, but they pick which things are drugs, right? Because drugs. Anyways, rant over. Long story short, critiquing and being critical is not negative. It's not saying, like, oh, this makes you terrible, this is moral judgment, this is value sign. No. It's true. This is the limits of one person's human perspective. We all have them. I have my limits of my human perspective because I am in this body and I have been raised in certain conditions and environments and such, and yada, yada, yada. We recognize these things. So pointing them out and holding accountable is not a negative thing. He's not a bad person. He didn't like fuck up or do a huge terrible thing, but like, hey, check that one. Because you should be learning and progressing. That is part of these dismantling of oppression. Like, you are going to have oppressive language if you're raised in an oppressive system. You are going to have to unlearn that. Pointing it out doesn't mean you're bad. Pointing it out makes it so that we can correct it and learn it, because it is incorrect. I mean, you said he said at least the 1970s, but like, his statement is not factually incorrect. It is still supremacist, because it does not acknowledge the very real and recent. Like, I'm pretty sure I can't think of a single continent that did not use drugs in their religions. And I'm going to put both of those in quotations because they are extremely hard to define. Polynesian cultures, like Polynesia, had kava and other things. I don't know all of them. Think of peyote in the indigenous cultures in the Northern Americas and the Central Americas. And then you go even farther, Central Americas, and no, yeah, peyote was used in both of the Americas. I'm pretty sure. There's other ones in South America as well that I know for a fact of. I'm drawing blanks. The continent of Africa also used drugs in their religious ceremonies and rituals. Asia. Like, opium and poppies. I'm just saying. Anyways, that was such a rant. Again, not a bad person. Don't disagree with the ideas. Just recognizing limitations and applying a critical lens when I'm reading it and taking information and sharing it with you. Dope. Okay. The spiritual or ceremonial... We have only just begun to understand how the human involvement with psychoactive plants has shaped our history. The information has been repeatedly stripped from it and made illegal to talk about and share because we criminalize people of color and any non-Abrahamic white religion. So it is not that we are only just beginning to understand, it is that we are finally pushing back enough that we're getting pieces back again. We stripped this information. Abrahamic white colonizers stripped our understanding of human involvement with psychoactive plants that shaped our history. That information was decisively removed. It probably shouldn't surprise us that plants of such power and possibility are surrounded by equally powerful emotions, laws, rituals, and taboos. These reflect the understanding that changing minds can be disruptive to both individuals and societies, and that when such powerful tools are placed in the hands of fallible human beings... Okay, yeah, and there's the Abrahamic shit right there. Being a human being who makes mistakes does not make you fallible. We aren't, like, fallible human beings means that inherently we will make mistakes. And in that essence of saying it in such, it attributes a value of fallible. No, that's called being human. Getting it right sometimes, getting it wrong sometimes, learning back and forth and progressing and not always doing it perfectly is called being human, not being fallible. I did not realize this. This is why I like reading in live time, because then we get to learn together. Saying it in such as fallible human beings attributes a value of fallible to human beings. If they said creative human beings, that would apply a value of creative to human beings. Humans are sometimes fallible. Humans are sometimes creative. Those are not values. Those are simply accurate states of being that comes with humanity. Humans are sometimes happy. Humans are sometimes sad. We are not sad human beings. We are not happy human beings. We are not infallible human beings, nor are we fallible human beings. We are simply human beings. You are never going to always be right because you're not supposed to be, and it's impossible. That's not how it works. It's a give and a take, and it's exchange. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. We simply exchange. So, we're not fallible human beings. It doesn't exist. People make mistakes, and they definitely do develop unhealthy relationships to drugs due to social and personal reasons. Absolutely. Our structural systems, though, play the most heavy role in whether or not we use drugs and if we misuse drugs. Rat Park. It was a study. Check it out. They made a whole little comic out of it, or it's written up like a comic, but it's a study that they did with, I'm pretty sure, opium or heroin. And they isolated rats and they gave them heroin, and of course they got addicted, and a lot of them overdosed. And then they built them a place called Rat Park and had food, water, social activities, type socializing space, things to do, all sorts of different stuff. And guess what? Even the rats they put in there addicted already, stopped, self-weaned. Being connected to society, being a part of a functioning and healthy society, is critical to our bodies and our minds. And we currently do not have one that functions well enough. Capitalism is an isolating, individualizing one, and it will absolutely always drive people to altered consciousnesses that are destructive. Because altered consciousness in and of itself is not, but an unhealthy relationship with one is. Things can go very wrong. We have much to learn from traditional indigenous cultures that have made... Bro, and then you say it. You literally admit that you had the knowledge. There is a tie, and it is an idea that has existed, that altered consciousness drugs, psychoactive drugs, are tied to religious experiences. Because religion is a unifying force of community in one's definition. Oh my, you said it. You knew it. It's okay. Ayahuasca, that was the one in South America. So peyote is mostly in North America and Central America, and then ayahuasca is also Central and South America. We have much to learn from traditional indigenous cultures that have made long use of psychedelics like mescaline or ayahuasca. As a rule, the substances are never used casually, but always with intention, surrounded by ritual and under the watchful eye of experienced elders. These people recognize that these plants can unleash Dionysian energies that can get out of control if not managed with care. But the blunt instrument of a drug war has kept us that we started, that we supplied, and by we I mean the United States. The CIA funded and supplied the Coke War, and pharmaceutical companies supplied the opioids war. So they are isolating and drugging us. That is quite literally. People are going to think I'm a conspiracy theorist, but the reality is that I'm not. These are simply just social patterns. And again, pointing them out isn't attributing value. It's simply pointing out that, hey, shit's on fire. Can we address that? Can we maybe put it out? Can we maybe actually regulate corporations? Can we maybe regulate pharmaceutical companies? Can we maybe regulate insurance companies and medical bill and hospitals? Maybe they shouldn't be allowed to bill so much. Maybe pharmaceutical companies shouldn't be allowed to charge however much the fuck they want. Maybe they shouldn't be allowed to withhold recipes and all that other stuff. Maybe they should actually have harder regulations and testing requirements before they give us whatever the hell it is. Because the side effects are serious, and they know they are. And they're investing in bad research that's built for profit, not for human health. The goal should be human health, not profit, but you can't have a goal that's not profit in capitalism. So if you have a pharmaceutical industry that operates in capitalism, you're going to have a pharmaceutical industry whose goal is profit, not a pharmaceutical industry whose goal is health. The medicine has become the poison. And we know this. So me saying it does not make me a conspiracy theorist. It's just true. It is bad, but like, it's just the reality. We do need to change it, but like, we don't, maybe we need a revolution. I don't know. I'm not trying to lead that shit. But the blunt instrument of a drug war has kept us from reckoning with these ambiguities and the important questions about our nature that they raise. The drug war's simplistic account of what drugs do and are, as well as its insistence on lumping them all together under a single meaningless rubric, has far too long prevented us from thinking clearly about the meaning and potential of these very different substances. The legal status of this or that molecule is one of the least interesting things about it. Much like a food, a psychoactive drug is not a thing. Without a human brain, it is inert. So much as it is a relationship, it takes both a molecule and a mind to make anything happen. The premise of this book is that these three relationships hold up mirrors to our deepest human needs and aspirations, the operations of our minds, and our entanglement with the natural world. And that's why I like this book, because I agree with that part. That is the questions we also should be asking. Those are very important questions. The legal status of this or that molecule is one of the least interesting things about it because it's the most arbitrary. It has nothing to do with what the chemical does or what the molecule does or how it affects or it has nothing to do with any of that. The relationship of food and drug and what the differences are and what the similarities are in that. The relationship that is critical between the molecule and the mind. Brilliant question and concept. I have personally some light-ish experience with the drug world. We're not going to name things, but I have dabbled. I have done things. I have definitely had very negative relationships with drugs. I've had negative relationships with food, so we've managed them, we've worked with them, and we keep it pushing. So, the status of licit or illicit of the drugs that I used, or the things that I experienced, like Michael Pollan said, is the least interesting part. The relationship and the way that I felt and the things that I experienced is by far much, much, much more fascinating. There are certain experiences, though, that I do not wish or to repeat ever, and also relationships which are not beneficial to anyone, that I would never, ever recommend. So there's that little caveat, and that's where we're going to stop that, because we're not trying to like cross any boundaries and get blocked by YouTube. Don't do drugs, kids. Seriously. Like, knowing the relationship is so fucking hard, and we don't have the research and the information that we do. So like 90% of them, especially the ones from Pharmacopoeia, don't touch them. They're not worth it at all. They are addictive and disrupt your mentality in terrible ways. Do not do it. But because I haven't named any of them, I'm not indicting myself. I'm also not saying when I did them, because statute of limitations. It could have been way outside. It is not in recent times. All statute of limitations have passed. I think. I'm not checking this. I don't care because it's not. We don't have negative relationships with drugs anymore at all. No abusive ones. I'm gonna go drink my water in my water bottle that I can't show on this. All right. Bum, bum, bum. Bum, bum. Good old Slavoj Zizek, Heaven in Disorder. What? Chapter 26. What is Trump's greatest treason? Okay. When in January 2021, District Judge Vanessa Names are hard and important. Vanessa Barretser rejected the U.S. demand to extradite Julian Assange. Many leftists and liberal critics commented on this decision in terms reminiscent of the famous lines from T.S. Eliot's Murder in the Cathedral. The last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right thing for the wrong reason. In the play, Beckett is afraid that his right thing, the decision to risk the king and sacrifice himself, is grounded in a wrong reason, his egotist search for the glory of sainthood. Hegel's answer to this predicament would be that what matters in our acts is their public content. If I enact a heroic sacrifice, this is what counts, independently of the private motives for doing it, which may be pathological. But the rejection of the Assange extradition bid is a different case. It was obviously the right thing to do, but what is wrong are the publicly stated reasons for doing it. Judge Barretser fully endorsed the U.S. authorities' assertion that Assange's activities fell outside of the realm of journalism and justified her decision purely on mental health grounds. She said, quote, "The overall impression is of a depressed and sometimes despairing man who is genuinely fearful about his future," end quote. And who raised in America would not be? Who raised under capitalism would not be? She added that Assange's high level of intelligence means he would probably succeed in taking his own life. Judge Barretser's evoking of mental health was here an excuse to deliver justice, her implicit but clear public message being, quote, "I know the accusation is wrong, but I am not ready to admit it, so I prefer to focus on mental health," end quote. Parentheses. Plus, the court also rejected bail for Assange, forcing him to remain in the conditions of imprisonment which have brought him to suicidal despair. End parentheses. Assange's life is maybe saved, but his cause, the freedom of the press, the struggle for the right to render public state crimes, remains a crime. This is a nice example of what the humanitarianism of our courts really amounts to. But all this is common knowledge. What we should do is apply Eliot's lines to two other recent political events. Is the comedy that took place in Washington in early January 2021 not the final proof, if one is needed, that Assange should not be extradited to the United States? It would be like extraditing dissidents who escaped Hong Kong back to China. The first event, when Trump put pressure on Mike Pence, his vice president, not to certify electoral votes. He asked Pence to do the right thing. Yes, the US electoral system is rigged and corrupted. It is one big fake, organized and controlled by the deep state, for the wrong reason. The implications of Trump's demand are interesting. He argued that Pence, instead of simply acting in his constitutionally prescribed pro forma role, could delay or obstruct the Electoral College certification set to occur in Congress. After the votes were counted, the vice president had only to declare the result whose content was determined in advance. But Trump wanted Pence to act as if he was making an actual decision. What Trump demanded was not a revolution, but a desperate attempt to save his day by forcing Pence to act within the institutional order, taking the letter of the law more literally than it was meant. The second event, when pro-Trump protesters invaded the Capitol on January 6, they also did the right thing for the wrong reason. They were there in protesting the U.S. electoral system with its complicated mechanisms whose aim is to render impossible a direct expression of popular dissatisfaction. That was clearly stated by the Founding Fathers themselves. But their attempt was not a fascist coup. Prior to taking power, fascists have historically tended to make a deal with big business. But now we have news headlines like, Trump should be removed from office to preserve democracy, business leaders say. So did Trump incite the protesters against big business? Not really. Recall that Steve Bannon was thrown out of the White House when he not only opposed Trump's tax plan, but openly advocated raising taxes for the rich to 40%, which would have been amazing. And I hate Bannon. I hate his ideas. I don't know him, so. Plus, he argued that rescuing banks with public money is socialism for the rich. Trump advocating ordinary people's interests is like when Kane from Welly's classic movie, accused by a rich banker of speaking for the poor mob, answers that yes, his newspaper speaks for poor ordinary people in order to prevent the true danger, which is that poor ordinary people will speak for themselves. Like any populism, today's also distrust political representation, pretending to speak directly for the people. It complains about how its hands are tied by the deep state and financial establishment. So its message is, if only we didn't have our hands tied, we would be able to do away with our enemies once and for all. However, in contrast to old authoritarian populism, like fascism, which is ready to abolish formal representative democracy and really take over and impose a new order, today's populism doesn't have a coherent vision of some new order. The positive content of its ideology and politics is an inconsistent bricolage of measures to bribe our own poor, to lower the taxes for the rich, to focus people's hatred on the immigrants and our own corrupted elite outsourcing jobs, and so on. That's why today's populists don't really want to get rid of the established representative democracy and fully take power. Without the fetters of the liberal order to struggle against, the new right would actually have to take some real action. And this would render obvious the vacuity of their program. Today's populists can only function in the indefinite postponement of achieving their goal, since they can only function as opposing the deep state of the liberal establishment. Quote, the new right does not, at least not at this stage, seek to establish a supreme value. For instance, the nation or the leader that would fully express the will of the people and thereby allow and perhaps even require the abolition of the mechanisms of representation. End quote. What this means is that the true victims of Trump are his ordinary supporters who take seriously his babble against liberal corporate elites and big banks. His liberal critics accuse him of only seeming to control his supporters, who are ready to violently fight for him, while really being at their side, inciting them to violence. But he is not really on their side. On the morning of January 6, he addressed the Save America rally in the Ellipse, a park near the White House, saying, "We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women. We're probably not going to be cheering for them so much for some of them, because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong." End quote. However, when the mob did this and approached the Capitol, Trump retreated to the White House and watched on television as the violence unfolded. Did Trump really want to make a coup d'etat? Unambiguously, no. When the mob penetrated the Capitol, he made a statement. I know your pain, I know your hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. Trump blamed his opponents for the violence and praised his supporters, saying, "We can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special." And when the mob began to disperse, Trump posted a tweet defending the actions of his supporters who stormed and vandalized the Capitol. These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away. He concluded his tweet with, "Remember this day forever." Yes, we should, because it displayed the fake of US democracy as well as the fake of the populist protest against it. Just a few elections in the United States have really mattered, like the California gubernatorial election in 1934, when the Democratic candidate Upton Sinclair lost because the entire establishment organized an unheard-of campaign of lies and defamations. Hollywood announced that if Sinclair won, it would move to Florida, etc. Trump's failure to be re-elected is the opposite of Sinclair's failure, a failure of somebody who fully deserved to fail. The image that will remain of the 2020 US elections is that of a furious, dissatisfied crowd attacking Parliament on behalf of a popular president deprived of his power through parliamentary manipulations. Sound familiar? Yes. This should have happened in Brazil or in Bolivia. There, a crowd of supporters would have the full right to storm Parliament and reinstall the president. A totally different game was going on in the United States. So let's hope that what happened on January 6th in Washington will at least stop the obscenity of the United States sending observers to elections in other countries to judge their fairness. Now, the US elections themselves need foreign observers. The United States is a rogue country, and not just since Trump became its president. The ongoing, almost civil war displays a rift that was there all the time. Every time. Still can't believe he shredded the book. Great cat. Apparently he has a thing against books. Not really, he just likes shredding paper. I'll give him napkins on the floor sometimes. I'll just throw a napkin on the floor if I get takeout. Homie shreds it, but he has so much fun. Loves it. It's his best friend for like a whole 24 hours, 36. Usually by that point it's destroyed. If it lasts that long. It's like the longest. But Douglas Adams' The Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We are reading The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Chapter 32. Emergency! Emergency! Blared the klaxons throughout Magrathea. Hostile ship has landed on planet. Armed intruders in Section 8A. Defense stations! Defense stations! The two mice sniffed irritably round the fragments of their glass transports where they lay shattered on the floor. Damnation, muttered Frankie Mouse. All that fuss over 2 pounds of earthling brain. He scuttled round and about, his pink eyes flashing, his fine white coat bristling with static. The only thing we can do now, said Benji, crouching and stroking his whiskers in thought, is to try and fake a question, invent one that will sound plausible. Difficult, said Frankie, he thought. How about, what's yellow and dangerous? Benji considered this for a moment. No good, doesn't fit the answer, he said. They sank into silence for a few seconds. All right, said Benji. What do you get if you multiply 6 by 7? No, too literal, too factual, said Frankie. Wouldn't sustain the punter's interest. Again they thought. Then Frankie said, Here's a thought. How many roads must a man walk down? Ah, said Benji, ah. Now that does sound promising. He rolled the phrase around a little. Yes, he said, that's excellent. Sounds very significant without actually tying you down to meaning anything at all. How many roads must a man walk down? 42. Excellent. That'll fox him. Frankie, baby, we made. They performed a scampering dance in their excitement. Near them on the floor lay several rather ugly men who had been hit about the head with some heavy design awards. Half a mile away, 4 figures pounded up a corridor looking for a way out. They emerged into a wide-open plan computer bay. They glanced about wildly. Which way you reckon, Zaphod, said Ford. At a wild guess, I'd say down here, said Zaphod, running off down to the right between a computer bank and the wall. As the others started after him, he was brought up short by a kilozep energy bolt that cracked through the air inches in front of him and fried a small section of adjacent wall. A voice on a bullhorn said, "Okay, Beeblebrox, hold it right there. We've got you covered." "Cops!" hissed Safod and spun around in a crouch. "You want to try a guess at all, Ford?" "Okay, this way," said Ford, and the four of them ran down a gangway between two computer banks. At the end of the gangway appeared a heavily armored and space-suited figure waving a vicious kilo-zap gun. "We don't want to shoot you, Beeblebrox," shouted the figure. "Suits me fine," shouted Zaphod back and dived down a wide gap between two data process units. The others swerved in behind him. "There are two of them," said Trillian. "We're cornered." They squeezed themselves down in an angle between a large computer databank and the wall. They held their breath and waited. Suddenly the air exploded with energy bolts as both the cops opened fire on them simultaneously. "Hey, they're shooting at us," said Arthur, crouching in a tight ball. "I thought they said they didn't want to do that." "Yeah, I thought they said that," agreed Ford. Zaphod stuck a head up for a dangerous moment. "Hey," he said, "I thought you said you didn't want to shoot us," and ducked again. They waited. After a moment, a voice yelled, "It isn't easy being a cop." "What did he say?" whispered Ford in astonishment. "He said it isn't easy being a cop." "Well, surely that's his problem, isn't it?" "I'd have thought so," Ford shouted. "Hey, listen, I think we've got enough problems of our own having you shooting at us, so if you could avoid layering your problems on us as well, I think we'd all find it easier to cope." Another pause and then the bullhorn again. "Now see here, guys," said the voice. "You're not dealing with any dumb 2-bit trigger-pumping morons with low hairlines, little piggy eyes, and no conversation. We're a couple of intelligent, caring guys that you'd probably quite like if you met us socially. I don't go around gratuitously shooting people and then bragging about it afterward in speedy Space Ranger bars. Like some cops I could mention, I go around shooting people gratuitously and then I agonize about it afterward for hours to my girlfriend. And I write novels," chimed in the other cop, "though I haven't had any of them published yet, so I better warn you, I'm in a mean mood." Ford's eyes popped halfway out of their sockets. "Who are these guys?" he said. "Dunno," said Zaphod. "I think I preferred it when they were shooting." "So are you going to come quietly?" shouted one of the cops again, "or are you going to let us blast you out?" "Which would you prefer?" shouted Ford. A millisecond later, the air about them started to fry again, as bolt after bolt of kilozap hurled itself into the computer bank in front of them. The fusillade continued for several seconds at unbearable intensity. When it stopped, there were a few seconds of near quietness as the echoes died away. "You still there?" called one of the cops. "Yes," they called back. "We didn't enjoy doing that at all," shouted the other cop. "We could tell," shouted Ford. "Now listen to this, Beeblebrox, and you better listen good." "Why?" shouted back Zaphod. "Because," shouted the cop, "it's going to be very intelligent and quite interesting and humane. Now, either you all give yourselves up now and let us beat you up a bit, though not very much, of course, because we are firmly opposed to needless violence, or we blow up this entire planet and possibly one or two others we noticed on our way here." "But that's crazy," cried Trillian. "You wouldn't do that." "Oh, yes, we would," shouted the cop. "Wouldn't we?" he asked the other one. "Oh, yes, we'd have to, no question," the other one called back. "But why?" demanded Trillian. "Because there are some things you have to do even if you are an enlightened liberal cop who knows all about sensitivity and everything." "I just don't believe these guys," muttered Ford, shaking his head. One cop shouted to the other, "Shall we shoot them again for a bit?" "Yeah, why not?" They let fly another electric barrage. The heat and noise was quite fantastic. Slowly the computer bank was beginning to disintegrate. The front had almost all melted away, and thick rivulets of molten metal were winding their way back toward where they were squatting. They huddled farther back and waited for the end. Chapter 33. But the end never came, at least not then. Quite suddenly the barrage stopped, and the sudden silence afterward was punctuated by a couple of strangled gurgles and thuds. The four stared at each other. "What happened?" said Arthur. "They stopped," said Zaphod with a shrug. "Why?" "Dunno. Do you want to go and ask them?" "No." They waited. "Hello?" called out Ford. No answer. "That's odd. Perhaps it's a trap. They haven't the wit. What were those thuds?" "Dunno." They waited for a few more seconds. "Right," said Ford. "I'm going to have a look." He glanced round at the others. "Is no one going to say, 'No, you can't possibly let me go instead'?" They all shook their heads. "Oh, well," he said and stood up. For a moment nothing happened. Then after a second or so, nothing continued to happen. Ford peered round through the thick smoke that was billowing out of the burning computer. Cautiously, He stepped out into the open. Still nothing happened. 20 yards away, he could dimly see through the smoke the space-suited figure of one of the cops. He was lying in a crumpled heap on the ground. 20 yards in the other direction lay the second man. No one else was anywhere to be seen. This struck Ford as being extremely odd. Slowly, nervously, he walked toward the first one. The body lay reassuringly still as he approached it, and continued to lie reassuringly still as he reached it and put his foot down on the Kilozep gun that still dangled from its limp fingers. He reached down and picked it up, meeting no resistance. The cop was quite clearly dead. A quick examination revealed him to be from Blagulon Kappa. He was a methane-breathing life form, dependent on his spacesuit for survival in a thin oxygen atmosphere of Magrathea. The tiny life support system computer on his backpack appeared unexpectedly to have blown up. Ford poked around in it for a considerable astonishment. These miniature suit computers usually had the full backup of the main computer back on the ship, with which they were directly linked through the sub-ether. Such a system was a fail-safe in all circumstances other than total feedback malfunction, which was unheard of. He hurried over to the prone figure and discovered that exactly the same impossible thing had happened to him, presumably simultaneously. He called the others over to look. They came, shared his astonishment, but not his curiosity. "Let's get shot out of this hole," said Slavoj. If whatever I'm supposed to be looking for is here, I don't want it." He grabbed the second Kilozap gun, blasted a perfectly harmless accounting computer, and rushed out into the corridor, followed by the others. He very nearly blasted hell out of an air car that stood waiting for them a few yards away. The air car was empty, but Arthur recognized it as belonging to Slarta Bartfast. It had a note from him pinned to part of its sparse instrument panel. The note had an arrow drawn on it, pointing at one of the controls. It said, "This is probably the best button to press." And that is where we are going to stop, because I am tired and I am hungry, and I'm gonna go eat food. As always, thanks for joining. Thanks for letting me rant, share ideas. We use rant casually, discuss. I'm monologuing because we're not sharing. It'd be cool to do a live with somebody. Alternate reading, I'd do that. And commenting, that would be fun. Anyways, thanks for joining for your daily dose. Glad you got some reading in, glad we got some reading in. See y'all next time. Deuces.